Hey everybody, Sung here. Welcome to How to Carve on a Snowboard Part 2. This video is a direct sequel on How to Carve on a Snowboard Part 1, where we discussed how to perform your first basic carves, or what I called long turns. In this Part 2 video, I'm going to talk about the advanced techniques that transform your carving from this to this. I promise you by the end of this video, you'll have all the knowledge and tools to carve better than ever before. The things that I'll be talking about in this video are going to be much more complex than in the previous one, so for the sake of clarity, I'm going to be a lot more direct. Let me start off by saying a few things. First, turn on the subtitles. There's a lot of talking in this video, so in order to make myself understood perfectly, I'll be including custom subtitles that you can read. Next, if you do not know what carving on a snowboard is or how to perform carves, watch How to Carve on the Snowboard Part 1, where I discuss everything related to making your first carve turns on a snowboard. This is a pure beginner video that anyone can watch and make their first carves with. If you've watched Part 1 already but still struggle to make pencil thin carves on every turn, review Part 1 again and perfect your long turns. There are many ideas, fundamentals, and terms in Part 1 that I'll frequently use and build off of in this Part 2 tutorial, and you won't understand Part 2 if you don't understand Part 1. So take a step back, review the basics, improve, and come back. If you've watched Part 1, understand all of the underlying knowledge and terminology, and are able to lie down perfect toe set and heel side carved long turns, then let's get right into it. Now in Part 1, we talked about long turns and carves, which are also known as side cut turns, where you tilt the board on its side, get into the open body stance, and ride the side cut all the way throughout the turn. Now, let's talk about the next natural progression, achieving shorter radius turns. For all turns on snowboards, the general rule is that the smaller the radius of the turn, the more difficult it is to perform. Carving is the epitome of that. Remember, the gold standard for all carved turns is that from start to finish, the whole turn has to be pencil line perfect, no exceptions. To tighten up the turn radius of a carved turn while maintaining its pencil line integrity is difficult, without the right knowledge, and that's what I'm here for, to give you what you need to make turns like these. There are 5 main parts that I'll talk about. In order, they are 1. Mastering long turns, 2. Weighting and unweighting, 3. Enhanced transitions, 4. Upper body movement and rotation, and 5. Speed mechanics. Each part is very detailed and builds upon the last, so make sure you at least watch everything in order. I am repeating myself again here, but in order to understand this Part 2 video, you must have your basic long turns down perfectly. You should be able to visualize your carves in your head and know the answers to these basic questions. What kind of track does a carved turn make behind the rider? What is an edge angle? How do you perform the open body toe side stance? What about the open body heel side stance? When do you perform transitions? In a carved turn, when do you gain speed, and when do you lose speed? And finally, what shape turn is best for going at a medium average speed? These questions summarize the basics of long turns when carving. The answers are in the descriptions if you want to check. If you can answer all of these questions confidently and can visualize everything in your head, let's move on to the next section. When you carve on a snowboard, the smaller the radius of the turn, the more difficult the turn becomes. To achieve better looking turns, new techniques and knowledge have to be introduced and utilized, most of which aren't conventional. That being said, let's look at what happens to the actual snowboard itself when we perform a carve. All snowboards have a camber profile, which is the physical shape of the board when looking at it from the side. There are many types of snowboard camber profiles nowadays, and if you're not familiar with them, The Search of Snowboarding has a great video that explains all of the profile types, their unique characteristics, and preferred riding styles. I've put a link to this video right above here, and also in the description. The camber profile I'm mostly concerned about right now is the traditional camber profile, which has been universally accepted by the global snow sports community as the best camber profile for carving for snowboarding and skis. Take a look at a board with a traditional camber profile from the side. The board in its untouched neutral state forms a wide W shape. This is called its camber. As pressure is applied to the camber board, the board starts to change shape. At first the board becomes flat, but as more pressure is applied, the board deforms heavier into an arc. The board is now flexed or decambered and stays decambered while pressure is still maintained. The whole snowboard is bending, meaning that the shape of the edge and the side cut changes from a wide W to an arc as well. If we pressure the board even further, the board flexes into an even sharper, smaller radius arc. And finally, when we remove the pressure, the board recambers itself and goes back into its neutral state. Now, how is this relevant to carving? Take a look at this long turns run and the board's estimated shape frame by frame. When you perform long turns, you tilt the board on its side cut and ride the circular side cut to perform a carve. That is what I said in part 1, but I left a few things out. What also happens is when you crouch your legs during the carve, you apply some pressure to the board and the board decambers into that arc shape we just discussed. So in reality, both the board decambering through you crouching, then you tilting on the now circular shape of the side cut, work together to give you a normal long turn carve. Let's look at this basic carve turn run again. When I enter the first turn, I crouch my legs to apply pressure to the board, decambering it to a large circular arc. I tilt the board on its now circular side cut, allowing me to ride the circular side cut all the way through, giving me a solid carved turn. As long as I keep my legs bent and my edge tilted, I can continue the turn for as long as I want. But I can't continue the turn forever, I have to start the next one. So to transition, I flatten the board by extending my legs, which removes most of the pressure from the board and allows it to recamber into a flat shape. To start the next turn, I lean into the toe side, enter the open body stance to crouch and decamber the board into an arc, the board tilts onto its side cut and decambers, and I ride the side cut through the turn, and the cycle continues. Here's the whole run at normal speed, and the board profile comparison so you can see what's happening live. So to recap, when you apply pressure with your legs to the board during the turn, the board decambers it into an arc. When you tilt your now arced board onto the now also arced edge, you ride the metal side cut through to create a carve. To transition, you flatten the board with your legs and recamber it back to neutral. This is how we bend our legs with basic long turns. We crouch our legs during the turn, and we extend our legs during the transition. Our goal here is to achieve a smaller turn radius. We're going to do that by literally inverting this leg flexing pattern. So instead of crouching during the turn and extending during the transitions, like in long turns, we have to now extend during the turn and crouch during the transition to get tighter, smaller radius turns. This might sound strange, so let me explain a few things first. Remember what I said about the pressure applied and how a cambered board responds? When you apply a small amount of pressure, the board decambers into a wide arc. Now when you apply even more pressure, your board decambers heavier into a sharper arc. An arc that, if you tilt it onto the snow, would result in a sharper, smaller radius turn. Now the question is, how do we achieve more pressure on the board during a carved turn? During long turns, or our beginner turns, in terms of our legs, we crouch during the turn and extend during the transition. You might think that to decamber the board more for a smaller turn radius, you just have to bend your legs more during the turn. I'm here to tell you that is outright wrong. Instead, we actually do the inverse. We extend our legs during the turn and crouch our legs during the transition. This sounds ridiculous, but think about it. We know that applying more pressure into the board results in a sharper arc and a smaller radius carve. Now, if you stand on your board on the flats and pretend you were entering a turn, what kind of motion would produce more force into the board? starting standing up and crouching into the board, or starting crouch and extending your legs quickly into the board. If you do these two at the same speed, the answer will always be that starting crouch and extending your legs during the turn will always produce more force into the board. Let's say you do this while you're about to enter a carved turn. When you start out crouched at the transition and extend your legs into the board when you start the turn, you produce a lot of pressure in the board, much more than if you had started extended at the transition, then crouched into the turn. Your board decambers into a smaller radius arc, and in that brief moment your board is decambered in that sharp arc, you tilt the board on its edge and ride it, and perform a turn with a much smaller radius than before. Congrats, you've just learned how to make a tighter radius carved turn. Conversely, if you extend your legs during the turn, that means you're going to have to crouch your legs during the transitions to maintain the pattern. So when you complete the carve in a half circle, you want to transition by crouching and leaning your body weight over the midline of the board, and start the next carve turn by extending your legs for the heavy decambering and shorter radius turn. This method works for both toe side and heel side open body stance. So the pattern goes: crouch during your transitions and extend your legs into and during the turn. Take a look at this middle radius turn run I've done here and the estimated board shape in comparison using the new techniques we just talked about. That was a lot, so let's recap. When you apply pressure to the board, you decamber it into an arc, and you tilt that arc on its side to get a circular carved turn. When you perform basic long turns, you crouch during the turn to apply some pressure to the board, and it decambers slightly into a large arc, yielding turns with a large radius. You also need to extend your legs during the transition. To perform advanced, shorter radius turns, you extend your legs into the board during the turn to apply much more pressure into it than before. The board decambers into a much tighter arc, giving you a much smaller radius turn. You also need to crouch your legs during the transition. So for advanced turns, crouch your legs in the transition and extend your legs during the turn. In summary, to tighten up your turn radius, all you really need to think about when you ride is to crouch your legs during the transitions and extend your legs during the turn. If you ride according to this pattern, you automatically produce tighter, smaller radius carves every time. Now, what do we call these new, shorter radius type of turns? It turns out there actually is an official naming convention for these different types of turns, but for the sake of keeping this video clutter-free and as simple as possible, I'll skip the background knowledge for another video and just get right to it. For the basic long radius turns, where you extend your legs during the transition and crouch during the turn, I'm going to call these downweighted turns from now on. For the advanced smaller radius turns, where you crouch during the transition and extend your legs into the board during the turn, I'm going to call these DownUNweighted turns from now on. You're probably confused as to why I'm using these new names for the basic and advanced turns. To be honest, I've been calling these turns different names in the whole video, and it's getting inconsistent and making my head hurt. While it might be confusing initially, it will be helpful for me and you, the viewer, in the long run, so just bear with me. I'll edit the subtitles so that you'll be able to understand which words are what. So remember, basic long turns are now downweighted turns, while advanced smaller radius carve turns are DownUnweighted turns. I mentioned in part 1 that the better your carves get, the more you'll start to be limited by your gear. At this point, you'll be transitioning from long downweighted turns to learning DownUnweighted, smaller radius turns, and your gear will start to impact your carving ability heavily. In this section, I'm going to go over gear and how it specifically relates to making more advanced, tighter, and sharper turns. The main issue with carving has always been toe side and heel side overhang. Toe and heel overhang is when your boot's toes or your binding heel cups hang over the edge over the board, and is detrimental because if you have a lot of overhang and tilt your board to higher edge angles, your boot toes or your binding heel cups will touch and drag across the snow. This immediately takes pressure off your snowboard's edge, which should be the only thing making contact with the snow when you carve, and you fall. Now, to be honest, when it comes to down-weighted turns, overhang doesn't matter too much because you'll never tilt the board to extremely high edge angles. In fact, you can carve long turns with almost any setup as long as you have the right form, camber or rocker, stiff or soft, park or all mountain. As long as the board has a circular side cut and an edge, any skilled rider can use it to make basic, long carved turns. Even rental boards can be used to make basic down-weighted turns. Advanced park riders are actually usually highly proficient in basic carves. In order to hit a jump or ride onto a feature, they have to lock in their edge to vault off lips at just the right angle and speed, something that can't be achieved by skidding all the time. Getting really good at the park requires some basic carving knowledge. But when it comes to higher level, down-unweighted shorter radius carves, things are different. Make sure to pay attention because here comes some theory. During any carve, the effective edge is the part of the board that makes contact with the snow when you tilt the board on its side, and is what you actually carve on during a turn, holding the weight of the rider and the forces of the turn, and producing those much desired pencil-thin lines. When you apply pressure to a camber snowboard, it decambers into an arc. And since the effective edge is part of the side of the board, the effective edge also decambers into an arc. Now, if you tilt this arc onto the snow and ride it, you get a carve. In order to get the whole arced effective edge onto the snow, though, you can't just lay it flat on the ground when you decamber the board, it'll just look like a banana. You tilt the board onto its side with your body until it fully rests onto the currently arced effective edge. Now, if you have forward movement while you tilt the board onto its effective edge, the board will cut through the snow in the same shape of the circular arced effective edge, giving you a carved turn. The angle that the board is tilted relative to the ground while making that circular carved turn is called the edge angle. This is an important term that's easy to remember, so don't forget it. Now, when you apply more pressure, like in our case through down-unweighted turns, the snowboard decambers further into a tighter arc, and so does its effective edge. Now that the effective edge is in a smaller radius arc, you need to tilt the board even further to get that effective edge back in contact with the snow. This actually produces higher edge angles than before. Again, if you're moving, the board will now cut through the snow in the same shape of the new, tighter circular arc, giving you a smaller radius carved turn. And so a relationship occurs. The more pressure applied to the board, the smaller radius arc the board and the effective edge decambers into, the tighter the resulting turn radius if you carved it, and the higher the maximum edge angle. Basically, the smaller the turn radius, the higher the edge angle you get. These two phenomena are interconnected and always happen together. Now add toe and heel overhang into the equation, and you can see where I'm going with this. If you have a lot of overhang, you'll be able to decamber the board just fine, but when you try to tilt the board onto its currently arced effective edge, your boot toes or binding heel cups will stop you from tilting the board to higher edge angles. You'll boot out, fall, and fail your turn. Overhang prevents high edge angles, which prevents smaller radius, more advanced turns. Now, if you have a proper carving setup with little toe or heel overhang, you won't have your boot toes or binding heel cups to stop yourself from raising your edge angles higher. The smaller the turn radius, the higher the edge angle, meaning that since you've increased the limit on your maximum edge angles with a no overhang, carving oriented setup, you've also unlocked the ability to make tighter radius turns. This is why when you get to down-unweighted turns, where you'll be regularly tilting your board to higher edge angles, having an overhang reduced carving setup is your first priority outside of technique. The two ways you can reduce overhang on your setup are A. Getting a board with a larger waist width, and B. Getting bindings with no heel cups, like rear entry bindings, or at least a raised heel cup. Here are some recommendations. This section is included in the last video, but I'm putting it here for your convenience. There are 3 over-the-counter boards with wider waist widths that are great for more advanced carves that I've ridden personally. The first is the Ride Twin Pig, a volume-shifted, downsized board, which also happens to have some of the widest waist widths I've ever seen on an over-the-counter board. Here's the waist width chart for reference. Compared to my 156 Custom X, which has a waist width of 25.2 centimeters and is considered a conventional carving board by Burton, a 154 Twin Pig has the waist width of 26.8 centimeters. This means less boot out on both toes and heels and super deep carves. There is also the War Pig and the Super Pig, but I choose the Twin Pig thanks to its almost all camber profile, which is the best for carves. Remember, this one is volume shifted, so you'll want to downsize 3 to 6 centimeters compared to your typical board. The Never Summer Proto FR is another board I've ridden that can lay trench if you know how to control it, specifically the X sizes as seen on this chart here. It's a directional board and also features triple camber, which makes it more butterable, but the extra wide waist width allows these boards to dig trench harder than most snowboards. Never Summer also has other boards that have wider waist widths, so check out their lineup and keep an eye out on the waist width area on the chart. The LibTech Orca is also another great board for carves. It features an extra wide waist width compared to other normal boards. It's also directional and volume shifted, with corresponding directional triple camber and bonus magnet traction built into the side cut, meaning this thing eats ice for breakfast, and if you know how to carve at least decently, icy conditions will be no problem for you. The latest addition to the over-the-counter carving boards is the Yes Grates, which most important feature, of course, is the wider than normal waist width that unlocks deeper carves. This board also features a non-uniform edge, something pretty similar to magnet traction, that Yes calls mid-bite. Interestingly enough, the board is also asymmetrical, meaning that the heel side is going to have a slightly smaller side cut radius, and all heel side carves are going to be slightly easier to perform. I personally think that asym is a bit of cheating, but the board has proven itself among one of the best over-the-counter carvers to date. Bindings are also an important factor for boot out, particularly on the heel side. Most bindings have this large hoop on their heel sides, meaning that if you tilt your board too much on your heel side, you'll boot out. If you can see that there's clearly more overhang on the heel side than the toe side, which is usually the case with most bindings, you can try messing with the binding base plates to adjust the whole binding closer to the toe side. Try to eliminate as much overhang as you can, or at least make overhang as equal as possible on both sides. You can also invest in bindings with no heel cups at all, like the ones I use, which are called rear entry bindings. These rear entry binding types don't have a heel cup, but instead use a sturdy wire to transfer force from the high back into the base plate. No heel cups means that there's almost no heel side overhang compared to a classic binding. This means unlocking deeper, higher edge angle heel side carves. Combined with my ultra-wide Donic board, I have practically no overhang at all on the heel side when using a rear entry binding, which allows me to dig trench like no one else. The 2 rear entry bindings that I'm aware of and have used are Flow bindings, which are the brand I use, and SP Mountain bindings. Both of these bindings feature a rear entry system and no heel cups, meaning that you'll unlock deeper heel sides if you use these bindings. I personally use the Flow NX2CX Fusion models, because the sturdiness and stability I get from the metal chassis allows me to drive the carves just better. SP Mountain bindings are also an amazing option because they're like Flows, but lighter and just as responsive. K2 also has a rear entry option, but I haven't tried that personally yet, so I won't be including it on this list officially. Remember, the less overhang, the less boot out, the higher the edge angles, and the stabler and better the carves. There's another snowboard specification that I need to talk about when it comes to advanced carving, the snowboard's flex. If you ask someone that only makes basic down-weighted turns about their opinion on a good board flex for carving, they'll tell you that a stiffer board is good for carves. And at first thought, that does sound right. You want a board that will resist bending and hold its shape while you tilt it on its edge and ride the mostly unchanged side cut all the way through. And in fact, this quality is great for your basic, long turns / down-weighted turns, where the whole point is not to put too much pressure into the board during the turn and to have the board barely decamber and just tilt it on its side. But if you want to progress to higher level, smaller radius carve turns, you actually need the board to decamber, remember? So despite conventional knowledge, you're actually going to want a medium flex camber board that will flex a good amount when pressure is put into it, so that it can actually easily bend into the shorter turn radius arc that we want and tilt to those extreme edge angles, but also pop and recamber back into its neutral shape with a good amount of power. Having an overly stiff board is actually a huge disadvantage for trying to achieve shorter radius turns, as the extreme stiffness stops you from bending the board into a sharper arc. It's technically possible to make shorter radius turns with a deathly stiff board, but take it from me personally, trying to tough it out and wasting so much energy trying to decamber an ultra stiff board every turn just isn't worth it. So in fact, instead of super stiff boards, medium flex camber boards are perfect for achieving higher performance, shorter radius, higher frequency carve turns. Every time you pressure the board, it'll bend easily to get that deeper arc and a smaller turn radius, and pop right back quickly for the next carve. I also talked about forward lean in your bindings in part 1 and how it made carving easier. In that video, I said that more forward lean causes you to bend your knees slightly all the time, and for downweighted carve turns, this was beneficial because you had to bend your knees during the turn, and having them slightly pre-bent is pretty helpful. But for more advanced down-unweighted turns, having a good amount of forward lean in your bindings is not only recommended, but almost necessary. But why? If we look closer, what forward lean actually changes is the angle at which your ankle is permanently bent at. Take a look at this comparison here. When I have no forward lean, my ankle is natively 90 degrees. But when I have maximum forward lean, my ankle is locked into a tighter angle, something close to 80 degrees. Fortunately, this isn't uncomfortable at all, and I can ride like this just fine, and again, I actually need forward lean for higher performance carves. But again, why? Take a look at this comparison of me purposely extending my legs all the way while standing normally. On the left, I have no forward lean, but on the right, I have maximum forward lean. When I stand straight up and extend my legs fully without falling, in the no forward lean scenario, I extend my legs fully, and my board is flat. However, in the maximum forward lean scenario, since my ankles are locked in a less than 90 degrees position, I extend my legs fully, and look, the board already starts to get on edge just a little bit. My forward lean locked ankles cause the board to tilt a couple more degrees from neutral only when I extend my legs all the way. Now in this scenario, when I sit down on the snow crouch first, and slowly extend my legs and hook my edge into the snow, you can see that the edge angles in the maximum forward lean scenario are always slightly higher than when I have no forward lean. And when I extend my legs fully, I get the maximum edge angles for a carved turn, which is clearly higher in the maximum forward lean scenario. Basically, forward lean gives you a bit of leverage on your heel sides by providing you with a few degrees of edge angle when you extend your legs fully, thanks to your ankles being pre-bent and locked. But when will we ever extend our legs that much during a turn? Well, it just so happens that during down-unweighted turns, we have to extend our legs into literally every turn. And if you have maximum forward lean, you can get slightly higher edge angles on every heel side. It's a simple gear modification with no downsides, allowing you to get higher edge angles without learning new techniques. Every last bit of edge angle counts, so build good habits early while you're still learning and use your forward lean to its max. Now, while I did talk about what kind of gear is good for carving, you might have been interested in what kind of gear I use. Let's talk about my setup and why it's absolutely perfect for what I want to do. My board of choice is a Downweighted Transition. Downweighted boards have always been leagues above in build quality than most board manufacturers. They're beautifully stable at speed, sturdy to boot, and can hold an edge like nothing else. They're not great to jib with, but it's not like you'll be hitting rails with one. Downweighted boards are hard pack, ice, and groomer eaters, holding an edge in every carve better than any board in the USA. Now for my specific board, let's get into the specs and figure out why it's perfect for what I do. The length of my board is 153 centimeters and is a true twin. Now, I'm just above 178 centimeters tall, which means the board is slightly shorter for my height. Someone like me would probably typically use a 157 length board. However, the smaller than standard length along with the true twin profile allows me to turn, spin, and skid the board better. Perfect for a Dutch stance rider that's constantly swapping between regular and switch carving like me. The waist width of my board is 29.5 centimeters, and along with my rear entry NX2CX flow bindings ensures that I have no overhang on the toe side or heel side. Simply put, I will never boot out on decent snow, and go as high as I want into the edge angles on both my heels and toes. And more importantly, if I ever fail a carve, I know it's not because of my gear, it's a skill issue. The side cut of my board measures at 9 meters, a few meters larger of a side cut than your average snowboard, but not too large of a side cut like other Donics usually have. Side cut radius determines the average size of your turns, and seeing as to how I primarily ride a big snow, which main run spans less than a soccer field, a 9-meter side cut allows me to make more varied turns with the limited space I have. The side cut of every board fluctuates constantly, changing every time the board is pressured to make the turn radius. And especially with my Donic, the smaller 9-meter side cut allows me to make more options with my turns. Plus, fast short turns are a lot of fun to perform. The flex of my board measures at the middle, 5 out of 12, pure camber flex. A no-frills traditional camber profile with a middle-of-the-line flex makes sure that the board flexes amazingly well when I place pressure into it, meaning I can bend it into any smaller turn radius I want with relative ease. It also pops back into shape with plenty of energy, ready for the next pressure turn. The mid-flex is also hugely advantageous for carving tricks and butters. My bindings are the NX2CX flow bindings, which are high stiffness rear entry bindings. The rear entry is not only pretty cool, but allows the binding to have no heel cup, meaning I have no boot out on my heel side. And finally, Ride and Say No boots. The stiffness of these boots prevents ankle deflection pretty well, making my toe sides nice and responsive. That finishes up my gear list. Now you know exactly what gear I use and each aspect of it that helps my carving game out. Now that section was huge, so let's recap. Here's a brief summary. Downunweighting, where you crouch during the transition and extend your legs during the turn, produces more pressure into the board during the actual turns compared to downweighting, where you crouch during the turn and extend your legs during the transition. Downunweighting causes more board decambering, a smaller radius arced board and effective edge, and higher edge angles, and more advanced, smaller radius carves. You can get a setup with reduced overhang to make shorter radius turns and increase your maximum edge angles. You can use forward lean to get a little more leverage on your heel side for downunweighted turns. A middle flex camber board is better for advanced carves than much stiffer ones. And of course, my setup and its advantages according to my riding style. That wraps up this section 2 on downunweighted turns. This really is the crux of advanced carve turns, and you should be able to start making your carves better from here on out. But make sure to pay attention to the rest of the video, as all of the information is important to supplement your carving. Let's talk about transitions and how they change with the types of turns we make. With basic downweighted carves, when you transition between toe and heel turns, you extend your legs to flatten the board. You then lean from one turn into another to initiate the next turn. Take a look at this diagram of a downweighted turns run. Red is crouching your legs, and blue is extending them. You have a carve, then a transition in the middle, then another carve in a continuous pattern. Since you bend your legs during the turn, you extend your legs during the transition, you bend your legs for the next turn, and etc., making turn after turn. In advanced downunweighted turns, because now you extend your legs during the turn, you now have to bend your legs when you transition, like in this run shown here. I extend during the turn and crouch during the transition. I call this motion crouching through the transition, where you crouch your legs and shift your weight over the midline of the board at the same time, completing the transition and setting yourself up for the next turn. Crouching through the transition actually makes for a surprisingly fast motion, much faster than if you had to slowly stand up and lean into the next turn, like in basic down-weighted turns. And it makes sense. Down-unweighted turns take less actual time and distance to complete compared to down-weighted turns, meaning that the transition also has to be faster as well in order to accommodate the smaller turns. As you can see in the direct comparison, down-unweighted transitions are just straight up faster than down-weighted transitions. You literally can't transition faster than down-unweighted transitions. It's just not possible to transition faster by extending your legs compared to transitioning by crouching through it. In fact, if you try to speed up extending your legs to enter the transition while performing down-weighted turns, you'll start to accidentally jump out of your turns. Extending your legs is basically jumping, and if you do it too quickly, you'll vault out of the turn when you don't mean to. You can use this phenomenon later on for more advanced turns, like dolphin turns, but for now we're only trying to keep our carves on the ground. So in terms of getting your turns faster and sharper, you have to crouch through the transition. Now here's another interesting thing about crouching through the transition. Remember when I talked about how the board decambers during carved turns? When you apply pressure to the snowboard, it decambers from a normal camber profile into an arc. This happens during the turn. Now when you remove that pressure, the board recambers and pops back into its normal shape, which happens during the transition. For advanced down-unweighted turns, since you extend your legs during the turn and load up the board with significantly more pressure under a shorter amount of time, when you crouch during the transition, you immediately release all the pent-up pressure in the decambered board, and the board recambers. The recambering force pushes into your legs, further crouching your legs even quicker. All the while, you just need to lean your body weight over the midline into the next turn, and after you've crossed the fall line, you can just extend your legs to start the new turn. Down-unweighted, crouched transitions are absolutely superior in terms of speed and are necessary for linking smaller radius turns. If you're following the down-unweighting pattern of extending your legs during the turn and crouching during the transition properly, transitions should be pretty easy to master. Faster transitions are also good for your carves in general because they facilitate early edge initiation. Early edge initiation is getting to a high edge angles quickly in the beginning of a carved turn. The higher the edge angle, the more stable the carve is due to the edge cutting deeper into the snow. The lower the edge angle, the less your board cuts into the snow, and the more likely you are to wash out or skid out of the turn. So start your turns with an early and high edge angle to ensure that your edge is locked into the snow early on into the turn. If you start with a low edge angle and try to transition slowly into a high edge angle, you'll just wash out of the turn where the forces are greatest and skid, just like this. Early edge initiation can only be achieved by having a snappy transition and extending your legs quickly to achieve a high edge angle fast, so make sure you crouch through your transitions quickly to set up for your turn. If you're having trouble getting transitions down, I actually have a drill for you. Here are cross-under turns, a drill that you can use to improve your transition speed. Cross-under turns are a type of turn used by slalom racers in order to maintain stability and speed, but are primarily used by carvers to maintain speed and control in the flats and catwalks. For our purposes, we'll be using these turns as a drill to get more comfortable with transitions. Here's how to perform them. At the top of the slope, point the nose of your board down the hill, body in line with the board. Next, turn only the upper body towards the bottom of the hill, body completely open. Your head should be facing down the hill, and hands held up like the bottom two corners of the rectangle at shoulder height. Start to go down the hill, body still open. Start with a small toe or heel side carve, but instead of following through with the carve, make fast, open mini carves by flexing and extending your legs extremely quickly on the respective turns. On your toe side, you're going to bend your back knee to its maximum, and your heel side, you're going to extend both of your knees all the way out as much as possible. If done right, one should be making consistent high-frequency small arc degree turns and traveling directly down the fall line, like shown in this chart. Make sure to shift your weight back towards the tail slightly to maintain stability, and to not have the nose of your board dip into the snow and make you cartwheel forward. The name cross under refers to how the upper body is completely static while the legs cross under the upper body as they quickly pass back and forth. Cross under turns are technically down unweighted turns because you're keeping your legs crouched during the transition and extending them during the turns. You're just performing it at a high frequency. The main difference is that with cross unders is that you make very skinny turns and stick to the fall line on purpose, quickly making as many turns and transitions as you can, but with normal down unweighted turns, you make more half circular turns and go far from the fall line. Cross under turns are great because they train transition smoothness and speed, which will aid in making your normal down unweighted turn transitions feel more natural. Cross unders also train balance, edge control, speed comfort under varied movements, leg and knee max range of motion, and board decambering and recambering feedback. Alright, that concludes this section on transitions. That was a lot as usual, so a quick summary for you. For down unweighted turns, you crouch during the transition and lean over the midline from one turn into the next at the same time. Your legs crouching combined with the board quickly recambering from how much pressure you put into it from the turn you just exited will make your transition much faster. This advanced way of transitioning is much faster than down weighted turns, where you only stand up during the transition and slowly lean over the midline into the next turn. To train these down unweighted turn transitions, where you crouch through the turn, perform cross under turns as a drill. So far up to this point, we've only been focusing on the lower body. In this section, we'll talk about the upper body and hips, how they move, the way they contribute to carve turns, and how to use the upper body and hips more effectively for down unweighted carves. Do you remember part 1 where I talked about the open body technique and basic turns? To summarize, for beginner down weighted turns, you rotate your body and mid-torso towards your heel side counterclockwise or clockwise for regular, goofy respectively, 90 degrees when you enter a carved turn. You do this for both heel side and toe side, and combined with your back leg bending, you achieve a lower center of mass, a decently high edge angle, and an upper body that's balanced 50-50 left and right over the edge. For down unweighted turns, things are kind of similar in terms of the upper body and hips. While you are literally inverting the pattern in which you bend your legs, the function of opening your body stays the same, to balance your upper body over the edge. You want to open and close your upper body and hips in a very simple pattern. When you hit the fall line and are in the middle of the transition, your upper body and hips should be completely closed in line with the board. When you enter the turn, start opening your body, and by the time you reach the apex of the turn, or slightly earlier than that, your upper body and hips should be open at least 90 degrees. Your hips should be a little bent now because you're achieving higher edge angles with down unweighted turns, but you still want to open your hips along with your upper body the best you can. Once you get near the end of the turn, just close your body back up so it's once again in line with the board. After you hit the transition, open your body for the next turn. Again, going into the heel side, when you hit the fall line or in the middle of the transition, your upper body and hips should be completely closed in line with the board. When you enter the turn, start opening your body, and by the time you reach the apex of the turn, or slightly earlier than that, your upper body and hips should be open at least 90 degrees. Your hips should be a little bent now because you're achieving higher edge angles, but you still want to open them the best you can. And you continue this pattern for each toe side and heel side. At this point, after getting better at down unweighted turns and transitioning, you might feel like your heel side doesn't feel as stable or powerful or as good as your toe side turns. Now, this is normal, we've talked about this before. Since we're duck stance and facing naturally into the toe side, all of our toe sides are going to be just easier to perform, especially once you tighten up the turn radius. The major difference for upper body and hip rotation between basic down weighted turns and advanced down unweighted turns are that with down unweighted turns, you both unlock the ability to, and also need to, open your upper body and hips much more, particularly on the heel side. Many riders learn how to down unweight properly in their turns, but fail to remember that they have to open their bodies and hips on their heel side, which limits their performance on all of their heel side turns. So next time you perform a down unweighted heel side, rotate your upper body and hips in the same direction of the turn. Opening your upper body and hips to this degree provides a huge amount of stability for the turn. When you get to the highest edge angles and the most advanced turns, you'll realize that you can't make any heel side turns unless you rotate your upper body and hips towards the heel sides aggressively. Now as for why, there are several reasons why you can't perform advanced turns without rotating your body, all of which I'll go over in How to Carve Part 3. The reasoning is extremely detailed and too complex for this already long intermediate video, so stay tuned for Part 3, where I'll discuss more advanced techniques in theory. However, there is a technique of interest relating to upper body and mid-torso movement I want to share that can bring your heel sides to the next level. When you open your body into the heel side, you rotate your upper body and hips towards the heel side, and when you do, your board actually slightly rotates as well. This is much easier to demonstrate in the flats. Watch as I start with my body closed and square to the board, then rotate my upper body and hips aggressively while keeping my core tight. When I turn my upper body and hips, my legs, and then turn my board, rotate a moment after to match my initial rotation. During a carve, you can actually use this phenomenon to your advantage on all of your heel sides. I call this phenomenon rotational momentum, where you use the force generated from your upper body and into the board to your advantage. The core twisting drives the board deeper into the snow, and more importantly, the circular rotating motion you make with your upper body generates a little bit of angular momentum, which adds to the circular momentum of the turn. To really take advantage of this, when you rotate your upper body and mid-torso into the heel side, really exaggerate the whole rotation motion, especially with rotating your hips, not just your upper body. As you do, you really feel like you're driving the turn with your upper body and hips. Your heel side turn will feel more circular, stabler, and snappier, setting you up for a clean transition and the next toe side turn. There's a reason why you see me violently turn my body outwards towards all my heel sides. Alright, that wraps up the section on upper body rotation. Here's the summary. Opening your body, and especially the hips, with the open body technique is pretty much mandatory for down unweighted turns. Close your body during the transition, and open your body quickly into the turn at least 90 degrees. The rotational momentum and motion of opening your body on the heel side will help your heel sides feel more stable and really feel like you're driving the turn. To do this, exaggerate the opening of the upper body and especially the hips on every heel side very heavily and aggressively. Speed mechanics are such an important aspect in carving that I'm going to fully review this section for part 1 just for part 2. Remember, speed mechanics apply to every size and type of carve and are extremely important to learn. Now that we're going for more advanced carves, you'll need to understand how speed works during a carving run in order to manipulate it to your advantage. Let's recap the basics. Take a look at this diagram here, a series of semicircular or half-circle turns. In a carved run, a rider gains speed during the turn, where the board is pointing down the hill. This is represented by the red sections of the diagram. When one actually starts going sideways or traversing across the run, which happens during the transition, some speed is actually lost. This is represented by the blue section. So during a perfect half-circle carved run, in the turn the speed is gained, while during the transition speed is lost. The rider gains some speed, then loses some, then regains some, and maintains a constant, controllable speed. Now compare this diagram to these two here, featuring turns that are skinnier, not half circles anymore, and closer to the fall line. You can see that in the second diagram, the blue sections where the rider is traversing across the run is much smaller or almost non-existent compared to the first. This means that the rider doesn't lose enough speed at the transitions, and as a result picks up more and more speed each turn, speed that beginners can't control. Now here's something interesting I want to call attention to. If we're looking at the second diagram, from what I've seen, these skinnier turns are the type of turns that people who know how to perform down unweighting but have too much overhang and can't achieve high angles regularly make. They crouch their legs during the transition and extend their legs during the turns as they should, but because they have overhang they can't actually tilt their board to extreme edge angles. The exact reasoning why they can only make these shallow open turns is a little complex, but putting it simply, they can extend the turn to a full half circle arc and achieve the tightest turn radius despite down unweighting and using advanced techniques, resulting in shallow arc down unweighted turns where they gain speed massively. This doesn't mean that these riders are bad. They work within the limitations of their gear and carve extremely well and fast in spite of these limitations. Hand these riders a setup with less overhang and they'll learn how to touch their hips on their heel sides in a few days. In the third diagram, the rider is hardly traversing across the run, and in terms of speed, is just going as fast as if they were just going down in a straight line. These are basically just crossed under turns. Static upper body with the board crossing under quickly, extremely close to the fall line, lots of transitions and turns, and losing no speed at all. Basically, as a rule of thumb, the fatter or further from the fall line the turns are, the more circular and more speed lost during each turn, meaning the rider will go generally slower. And the smaller the arc length, or the skinnier or closer to the fall line the turns are, the faster the rider will go. And this is where the relevance of these speed mechanics come in, speed control as a now intermediate to advanced carver. You as a rider are able to determine how fast you go in a carve run by making your turns more circular by drawing them out more to go slower, or go faster by making your turns skinnier. And remember, this applies to carve turns of every and all radius. Beginner or intermediate or advanced, no matter what type of turns you make, the laws of speed in carves will always apply. In fact, now that your turns are smaller in radius and you have less of a timing window to adjust your turn shape, speed management becomes a very subtle but hugely important skill that you'll have to keep in the back of your head when you carve. Once you master speed control, you'll be able to change your turn arc distance and speed at will, giving you vastly more control over your riding. When you're going too fast and try to perform a carve, the edge of the snowboard either won't dig into the snow, or if the edge is already settled in, you will jump out and wash out of the snow because there's just too much momentum and speed for the edge to hold. No matter how good your form is, at a certain point if you're going too fast, you'll be either forced to skid or slarf out of the turn, or just straight up wash out and fall. So make sure to make the right type of turns to control your speed, all the while adjusting to slope pitch and obstacles. While the rules of speed mechanics do apply to all types of turns, there are going to be changes in types of speed within the different types of turns. There are two types of velocities to consider here, scalar velocity and angular velocity. Scalar velocity is how fast you are going in terms of physical distance, while angular velocity is how fast you are going in terms of the arc of the turn. Downweighted turns are also called long turns, due to their long radius. A rider making long turns has a high scalar velocity, but low angular velocity, meaning that while they might be going generally fast, they do take quite a long time to complete one half circle turn. Downunweighted turns are also called mid or short turns due to their middle or shorter radius compared to long turns. A rider making down unweighted turns has a lowered scalar velocity, but a massively increased angular velocity. So in reality, a rider making many small radius, high performance carve turns in a row is actually going physically slower compared to someone making large, wide basic turns. The best way to imagine this comparison is probably something you've seen live. Someone making advanced mid to short radius down unweighted turns can make 3 or 4 turns in the time that it takes another rider to make one massive half circle long turn. This goes to show that speed management, not going fast all the time, is everything. That concludes the section of speed management. That was a lot, so that calls for a summary. Speed management is important in all sizes of carve turns, especially smaller radius turns. You traverse across a run to lose speed in the transition, and travel downhill the run during the turn to gain speed. Balance of speed is achieved by the constant cycle of increase and decrease of speed. Smaller radius turns have riders go at lower scalar speed, but higher angular velocity than larger radius turns, meaning more turns per the same distance. And finally, a good carver can adjust the shape of their turns to control their speed at will, but must always strive to maintain a balance of speed. Alright, I think we went over everything. That was a ridiculous amount of information, so let's gather it all up here. 1. Mastering long turns. Know your fundamentals. 2. Weighting and unweighting. Downunweighting, where you crouch during the transition and extend your legs during the turn, produces more pressure into the board during the actual turns compared to downweighting, where you crouch during the turn and extend your legs during the transition. Downunweighting causes more decambering, a smaller radius arced board and effective edge, and higher edge angles, and more advanced, smaller radius turns. You can get a setup with reduced overhang to increase your maximum edge angles and unlock better turns. You can use forward lean to get a little more leverage on your heel sides for downunweighted turns. A middle flex camber board is better for advanced carves much more than stiffer boards. My setup and its advantages according to my riding style and me gushing about Donic boards. 3. Advanced transitions. For downunweighted turns, you crouch during the transition and lean over the midline from one turn into the next at the same time. Your legs crouching, combined with the board recambering from how much pressure you put into it from the turn you just exited, will make your transitions much faster. This advanced way of transitioning is much faster than downweighted turns, where you only stand up during the transition and slowly lean over the midline of the board into the next turn. To train these downunweighted turn transitions, perform cross-under turns as a drill. 4. Upper body rotation. Opening your body with the open body technique is pretty much mandatory for downunweighted turns. Close your body during the transition and open your body quickly into the turn at least 90 degrees. The rotational motion and momentum of opening your body on the heel side will help your heel sides feel more stable and more like you're driving the turn. To do this, just exaggerate the opening of the upper body and especially the hips on the heel side very heavily. 5. Speed mechanics revisited. Speed management is important in all sizes of carve turns, especially smaller radius turns. Travel across the run during the transition to lose speed, and travel downhill during the turn to gain speed. Balance of speed is achieved by the constant cycle of increase and decrease of speed. Smaller radius turns have riders go at lower scalar speed, but higher angular velocity than larger radius turns. And a good carver can adjust the shape of their turns to control their speed at will, but should always strive to maintain a balance of speed. That was a lot of info. Well, now you know I'm not joking when I say my videos are comprehensive. To finish this video off, I'm going to analyze 2 of my runs in relation to everything we talked about in order. The first run I'll analyze will be one where I'm making intermediate, middle radius downunweighted turns, and the second run I'll make more advanced, shorter radius, hip-touching downunweighted turns. You can use this analysis to get a better understanding of each aspect of intermediate turns that I've talked about, and I also encourage you to cross-compare footage of your own riding with mine to see where your mistakes are. And one more thing, I may have talked about these aspects in order as separate parts, but I want you to understand that all these parts are connected together. This analysis is so that you can really comprehend that every element of carving I've talked about in this video aren't separate, they're interdependent, each concept mixing into each other with each turn. And I think this is where the beauty in carving lies. Multiple technical concepts meshing and flowing together in a constant cycle to repeatedly produce the single thing it all comes back to, a carved turn. But learn everything in order. Start with downunweighting your turns, then working on your transitions, and etc. And in time everything will fall in line and start to make sense. At first, all of this information will definitely seem overwhelming, but just focus on what you actually need to physically perform instead of the theory at first when you're on the mountain. These new techniques definitely won't feel natural at first when you practice them, and they sure won't feel great when you put them together for the first time too. But slowly but surely, as you crank out runs, you'll experiment and push your limits. Each run you'll push your board just a little more forcefully, rotate your body slightly harder, and transition just a bit faster. And as you press out turn after turn, run after run, your body will start to understand the motions that produce a carve better than you will, eventually allowing you to perform carves just based on feel. In time, everything will fall into place, awarding you with that one perfect run where everything just feels right. When you finally achieve that perfect run, that is the moment you realize you are a carver. With that, let's get into the analysis. Here's the final analysis. Since we're already familiar with how to perform basic down-weighted long turns, we'll skip down-weighted turns and move on to mid-radius and short-radius down-unweighted turns. This run being shown here at normal speed is a mid-radius down-unweighted turn run. Alright, now that you've seen the run at normal speed, I'm going to break down everything step by step in slow motion. I start my run pointing straight down the hill and starting off with half of a heel side carve. I don't go downhill too much because I don't need as much initial speed to start the turn for smaller radius turns. My legs are also extended when I start out because remember, during every turn I should have my legs extended. I'm intending to perform down unweighted turns, so I crouch my legs when I enter the transition. This sets me up for what I need to do during the subsequent toe side. I extend my legs, applying a lot of pressure to my board, decambering it into a mid-radius arc, which I cleanly carve on. I'm at the next transition, which means I have to crouch my legs to remove pressure off the board and recamber it back to normal. I flatten the board by crouching my legs and finish the toe side, then lean into the next heel side, where I extend my legs again to apply pressure to my board with the start of the turn, decambering it into a sharp arc, which I cleanly carve on. Once again, I crouch through the transition, then extend my legs through the next toe side. So we crouch through our transitions and extend our legs during our turns. Got it. Let's focus on upper body rotation now. Remember, the pattern for upper body rotation was that during our transitions, we close our body and keep our shoulders in line with our board. When we enter our turns, we turn our upper body and hips the best we can to get our body into the open body stance, which gives us balance in our turns. On the heel side, I rotate my upper body and hips clockwise to get myself perpendicular with the board, getting me into a balanced position. As I come up on the next transition, I close my upper body and hips to become parallel with my board. My body is now closed and in line with my board, ready for what comes next. As I extend my legs to enter the toe side, I also open my upper body and hips once more to be perpendicular to the board and enter the open body stance, giving me balance over my board during the turn. Legs extended and upper body and hips open, I carve the toe side cleanly. So we've established the two most important things. In terms of crouching our legs, during the turn we extend our legs, and during the transitions we crouch our legs. In terms of our upper body and hip rotations, during the turn we open our body 90 degrees, and during transitions we close our bodies to be parallel to our board. That takes care of sections 1 through 4. For section 5, which is speed mechanics, we'll replay the whole run at normal speed. On top of taking note of everything I've talked about so far, take a look at the shape of the turns I'm making. We've established that the best turn shape for maintaining a fast yet manageable speed are half circle turns, where you gain speed during the turn and lose a little bit of speed during transitions in a cycle. As I go through the run, I don't slow down, but neither do I wash out and fall because I'm going too fast. My half circle turns keep my speed in check and I flow down the slope in style. And that concludes the mid-radius turn run analysis. I hope you liked it. Now, let's move on to the short radius turn analysis, where we bump everything up a notch. This is where it really gets good. This time, we're going to analyze one of my short radius down unweighted turn runs, one where I'm able to get those amazing looking, deep, hip-touching high edge angle heel side carves. Believe it or not, I'm using the exact same principles from the mid-radius turn run from the last analysis. The main difference between the mid-radius and short radius, super deep turns runs, is the aggression and confidence with which I perform each action. When I extend my legs with more speed and power, I decamber my board into an extremely small arc, which I carve on. I rotate my upper body more aggressively, especially on the heel side where rotational momentum becomes a huge factor. This might all be confusing, but don't worry, I'll go into each section with extreme detail like I did in the last one. Let's take a look at the leg bending pattern with respect to the turns and transitions first. Just like the last run, I start off by going straight down the hill to gain a little bit of speed. I intend to make small radius turns, meaning that I won't go fast initially and don't need too much speed in general. Here though, I actually crouch and extend my legs extremely quickly right before I hit the fall line to transition. This makes it so right before I actually transition into the next heel side, I can get a smaller radius half toe side by crouching, then extending my legs really fast. Why do I do this? Personal preference, I guess. It feels better starting your run by having all of your turns have the same size. At least that's the way I feel about it. I reach the fall line and start my transition by crouching heavily, plus leaning into the next turn. Notice how much more I bend my legs during the transition compared to the medium radius run. I bend my legs quicker and more aggressively to set up for what I have to do right after. After every transition comes a turn. I extend my legs into this heel side, much more than in the previous run, resulting in more pressure into the board, more decambering into a smaller radius arc, which I carve through. Because my turn radius is small and everything happens so fast, I can actually touch my hips on the snow and get right back up like nothing happened. I crouch the transition and perform the next toe side by extending my legs as usual. What I want to emphasize again is this toe to heel transition. Remember, when you crouch your legs quickly during the transition after exiting a turn and the board is decambered heavily, as soon as you crouch your legs, you release all of that pent up pressure. The board recambers to neutral as you bend your legs in the transition, releasing a ton of energy that pushes back up into your legs and makes your transitions even faster. You crouch your legs to release the board's energy, and the board's energy pushes your legs back even further, resulting in a lightning fast transition. Because my transition is so fast, I can just lean into the next turn and extend my legs to decamber my board heavily for the next heel side. And again, this is the main difference between my advanced hip touching, short radius turns and my intermediate, medium radius turns. The speed, aggression, and confidence with which I perform everything. I push hard, and the board pushes back harder, giving me power and sharpness all throughout my turns. As I continue this run, I crouch to transition and extend my legs during the turn, making every single turn tight, sharp, clean, and uniform. Let's take a look at the whole run from the beginning, now in terms of upper body and hip rotation. In general, you should be opening your body during the turn and closing it during the transition for both toe sides and heel sides. But when it comes to these type of turns, remember that on your heel sides, you can turn your upper body and hips very aggressively to make the turn more stable. Remember, when you rotate your upper body and hips aggressively, not only do you get into the proper form faster, but the rotational momentum generated makes your turn much more stable. Take a look at all these heel sides that I'm slowing down, and make sure to keep your eye on my hands and my shoulders. You can see that on every heel side, I turn my body to an extreme amount, making my turn super deep and stable. And this is just in slow motion. Put the run at normal speed, and you can see just how aggressive my heel side rotations are, yet my heel sides are pretty solid to boot. I honestly don't think I could do these high performance heel sides without rotating my body this aggressively. Remember, the smaller radius the turn, the more aggressive the actions. In the end, open your body during the turns and close them during the transitions. But when performing smaller radius turns, turn your upper body and hips aggressively on the heel sides to get maximum stability from your upper body rotation. To finish it all off, we'll take a look at the run at normal speed a few times and take into account once again the type of turns that I'm making. I'm making near perfect half circle turns, which again keeps my speed in a cycle and in check. The rules of speed mechanics apply to every size radius turn, even these high performance short radius carves, so make sure to do your best to follow them to keep your speed manageable. I hope you enjoyed the analysis. You probably understand by now that the main difference between my intermediate mid turns and advanced short hip touching turns are speed, confidence, and aggression of my actions. The faster I extend my legs, the faster I transition. The more I press the board, the smaller the turn, the higher the edge angle. The more force I rotate with, the stabler the turn. There are a couple more techniques that I'm using that I'm not mentioning yet, that which I'll save for part 3. If you master intermediate down unweighted turns, try making everything more aggressive and see what happens. You might be able to touch your hips a few times on the floor too. And that's it. That wraps up part 2 on how to carve on a snowboard. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of this video. This one is a lot more detailed, but I try to make it as easy to follow as possible. In terms of future plans for this channel, I'm still making a comprehensive guide on boots, board, and binding characteristics and how they affect carving, basically a carving, gear, and tuning oriented video. If you liked how deep I was going into the gear in this video and want more nerdy stuff about gear tech and tuning, subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep your eyes out. In the meantime, go practice and master your Downunweighted carves. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and to follow my Instagram for more content and to stay notified. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.